In the year 1542, at Hakone Pass, a group of children hung upside down over a blazing fire. The heat was unbearable. Too much for some, whose bodies gave out before the flames did. A group of men stood to the side, watching coldly. One of them signaled that number 6 had perished and ordered him to be discarded. Another scoffed at the lack of talent among this year's batch, calling them dullards with a twisted laugh. Their attention soon shifted to a boy who remained calm despite the fire licking at his body. He was the only one enduring the ordeal. They identified him as number 8. One of the men noted that he alone had survived and remarked on his natural affinity for fire release. The scene shifted to a battle where the same boy faced off against the others. When the fight ended, he was the only one left standing. Watching from the sidelines, a few men were stunned by what they saw. One of them acknowledged that, even at such a young age, the boy had mastered all of the Fuuma ninja arts. An elder declared that the child was destined to become the next leader. The year 1546, during the night battle of Kawagoe, the ground was littered with bodies. Across the blood-stained battlefield, a voice recalled the existence of those who had moved in the shadows of history, individuals born prodigies and molded by relentless, arcane training in assassination. These beings were known as the Kusa, or by other names like Rappa or Kamari. Three ninjas were now before an elder, who praised their recent surprise attack as magnificent. This elder was Hojo Jinan. He announced that his lord was pleased with the overwhelming victory and would reward the Fuuma ninja squad with stipends. He expressed his expectations for their continued success, directing his words specifically to one of the ninjas. The boy lifted his gaze and gave his affirmation. His name was the 5th Fuuma Kotaro, the young boy who had survived the fire and grown into a lethal warrior. Jinan dismissed them, and the ninjas vanished into the shadows. Inside the building, another ninja hanging from the ceiling warned Jinan not to place too much trust in them. He reminded the elder that the Fuuma were unlike other ninja, extraordinary individuals forged through brutal training. The battlefield, he said, was nothing more than a gruesome heap of corpses, unrecognizable in form, shaped by the Fuuma's devastating ninjutsu which surpassed conventional techniques. Jinan chuckled darkly. He claimed there was no need to worry. The Fuuma, after all, followed an ironclad rule: absolute loyalty to the Hojo clan. Anyone who defied it faced death. He described the clan as being shackled to this rule, calling them wretched creatures. To him, they were the perfect tools. In the year 1579, during the Battle of Kasegawa, a general rode across the battlefield shouting for his men to seize the enemy commander's head and make a name for themselves. But his charge came to a sudden halt when he noticed a child standing alone in their path. Perplexed, he ordered the child to be killed. The boy calmly removed his mask, and his technique ignited. With a shout of fire transformation, a massive blast erupted from his body. The fire tore through the air, tearing off the horse's head and engulfing the soldiers in flames. Skin melted from bone as the inferno spread across the battlefield. Hidden underground, other ninjas lay in wait. Their faces emerged through the ground, and then they leapt into the chaos. Landing before the mounted general, their appearance filled him with terror. He recognized them instantly, the Kusa. Confused and frightened, he failed to react in time. Kotaro suddenly appeared behind him, and with a swift motion of his hand, he sliced clean through the man's head, ending him in an instant. Above the battlefield, a hawk circled in the smoke-filled sky. Kotaro looked up at it. His thoughts turned inward. To him, killing was everything. He killed to survive, and he would keep on killing. In the year 1613, Kotaro, now 80 years old, was brought forward in shackles. The once feared ninja, towering and broad, was led through a village as the people gathered to catch a glimpse of the legendary figure. Whispers spread among the crowd, some in awe, others in fear. One man marveled at Kotaro's sheer size, stunned by his presence. Another recoiled, declaring him a monster. A woman nearby simply muttered the word, "demon," as if in warning. Kotaro had been captured by the Edo shogunate. The Hojo clan, whom the Fuuma had served loyally, had long since fallen, defeated by Toyotomi Hideyoshi during the siege of Odawara. Their hidden village had also been destroyed, leaving no sanctuary or legacy behind. Kotaro was forced to kneel, preparing to face execution. A man stepped forward, asking if he had any final words. Kotaro offered none. Inwardly, he accepted the moment, knowing this was his end. The man carrying out the execution remarked that even a legend like Kotaro could not overcome sheer numbers. He noted that the Kusa of Higa and Koga still seemed to serve a purpose. But when Kotaro fixed his gaze on him, the man froze, seized by a primal fear. As the moment of death drew near, Kotaro's thoughts drifted inward. A chuckle echoed in his mind, bitter and accepting. He reflected on his aged body and the fate that had found him. He questioned why he had lived so long, when he had never feared death. He wondered if Master Kite still lived, still watching from afar. And if he did, would he watch over him even now? He envied the freedom Kite had once embodied. Kotaro longed for that same freedom. Since childhood, he had dreamt of it. An unattainable thing he continued to chase even into old age. He had lived for that dream right up to this final breath. The blade fell. Kotaro's head dropped to the ground. But then, as the world faded, his eyes suddenly widened. A red finger appeared, pointing directly at his severed head. Kotaro was stunned, unable to comprehend the surreal sight. A mystical hand hovered before him. A voice, calm, eternal, chose him. From beyond a dark gate, a flaming figure emerged, claiming to see the world through all things. Kotaro's gaze locked onto the flame within the gate. The voice declared that he would live again. A flash of light pierced the air. The scene shifted. A baby struggled, its eyelids heavy, its lungs screaming for air. It cried out in agony within its thoughts, desperate, suffocating. And then instinct took over. The child unleashed a technique, fire transformation. A powerful explosion erupted as the infant blasted its way out from within the body of a dragon, tearing through the creature's flesh. Floating in the air, the newborn's eyes took in the strange and mystical world around it. Below, the dragon's body crashed down with tremendous force, smashing into a castle and reducing it to rubble. As the dust cleared, the baby slowly rose to its feet. It looked up. Strange creatures emerged, green-skinned with sharp teeth and pointed ears. Demons, perhaps. Kotaro, now reborn, recognized the strangeness of this place. He lay on his back, staring into a sky that felt both foreign and vast. His thoughts became clear. The land was unfamiliar. There were flying lizards in the skies. And with that understanding came clarity. This was reincarnation. After Kotaro blasted through the dragon, someone was watching from below. As she looked up, her eyes widened in surprise when she saw a baby falling from the sky. At the same time, Kotaro was filled with joy. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever felt. He embraced the moment, declaring within himself that he had been reborn, overcome by a refreshing sense of liberation. From that moment on, he felt truly free. Nearly 100 years earlier, the hero Arslad had defeated the Demon Lord. He and his companions were celebrated as the 4 great heroes and became living legends. But with the rise of a new Demon Lord, the strength of the Demonkin surged. Much of the surface world had become part of the demon realm, signaling the dawn of a new age, an era ruled by the Demonkin. In the present, a massive green creature stood over Kotaro, its enormous foot pinning him to the ground. As it looked down, it noticed the infant beneath its foot and questioned what it was seeing. A human child, having fallen alongside the dragon, it made no sense. The creature was a member of the Goblinkin, the King Goblin. Scoffing at the sight, the King Goblin dismissed Kotaro as nothing more than a weak, inferior member of the humankin. With a sneer, he kicked Kotaro across the ground, sending the baby skidding until he landed on his back. Nearby, chaos had broken out among the goblins. One shouted to the king goblin that the Sky Goblin castle was completely destroyed. Another cursed their misfortune, calling the wreckage of their home unforgivable. Fueled by anger, the king goblin suggested they kill the child to blow off some steam, and the other goblins enthusiastically agreed. With bloodlust rising, they prepared for a messy execution. The king goblin raised his weapon and brought it down with full force toward Kotaro, smashing it into the earth. The goblins erupted in celebration, cheering the king goblin's critical hit with manic delight. But as the dust cleared, the king goblin's eyes narrowed. Kotaro had somehow dodged the blow. Internally, Kotaro was relieved to have narrowly avoided the strike. The goblins couldn't believe what they had just seen. The baby had dodged. As Kotaro observed his body, he thought that babies had underdeveloped bones which made it hard to move. Despite struggling, Kotaro forced himself to his feet. His body trembled, but he managed to stand. The Goblin King stared in shock as Kotaro suddenly vanished. Kotaro reappeared on top of the King Goblin's head, twisting its neck in a grotesque, unnatural motion. Without hesitation, he activated a technique ninjutsu, borrowed fire. Flames erupted around him and the Goblin King, engulfing them both. The Goblin King screamed as the fire tore into his flesh, but Kotaro held on, refusing to stop the flow of flames. The goblins could only watch in stunned silence. One of them stared in disbelief, trying to comprehend how a baby could wield such high-level magic. This wasn't just an advanced fire spell, it was something even greater. Meanwhile, the massive corpse of the dragon lay across the sky castle. Steps leading to the ruined structure stretched upward, and the woman from earlier was climbing them. As she ascended, memories stirred within her. This place had once belonged to the Elfkin. The sight brought a sense of nostalgia. Her thoughts returned to the baby, the one that had burst out of the dragon's belly. She was certain he was here. As she reached the upper level and looked around, she was met with a grisly sight. The bodies of goblins were strewn across the floor, torn apart in brutal fashion. Shocked, her eyes fell upon Kotaro, who fell to the ground, exhausted and spent from the battle. She slowly approached him, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. Could this baby truly have done all of this? Pulling back her hood, her expression shifted from disbelief to quiet recognition. She whispered to herself that she had finally found it, a tiny seed of hope. This woman was Hyrie Titania, one of the legendary 4 great heroes. A memory flickered into Kotaro's mind. He saw himself cradled in his mother's arms, his father beside her, smiling warmly. Confusion filled him as he tried to grasp the vision. The image of his birthplace emerged. His village, once hidden, now completely wiped out, its ashes smoldering. The scorched remains whispered of a massacre, the only sign of life being a single infant who had miraculously survived the inferno. The ones responsible for the destruction had remarked on the miracle or perhaps the will of a ninja. As the memory continued, Kotaro's voice echoed in his own mind. He questioned if these were truly his memories. Since the moment he was taken to the ninja village, he had lived under the belief that he had no parents, that the only one he could rely on was himself. Now, he wondered why such a memory would surface. His consciousness stirred, and slowly his eyes opened. Looking up, he saw a beautiful, well-endowed woman gazing down at him. The realization struck him. He had been reincarnated as a baby. His thoughts reeled as he tried to make sense of her presence. Was she a resident of this strange new world? The woman gently wrapped him in her cloak and laid him down on a rock before kneeling in front of him. She introduced herself as Hyrie Titania and greeted him by name. The use of his name startled him. He wondered how she could possibly know it. She then confessed, apologizing for having looked into his memories without his permission. His mind raced. It was impossible. How could someone access memories sealed so deeply? What kind of technique had she used? With a soft tone, Hyrie asked if he would allow her to stay by his side. She acknowledged the limitations of his infant body and offered her help, assuring him she'd be happy to support him in any way. Kotaro regarded her silently. He questioned her true intentions. Help, she said? What was her objective? But in the end, he decided it didn't matter. If she tried anything foolish, he would kill her without hesitation. In this unfamiliar world, trapped in a baby's body, he would use whatever resources were available. With that thought, he flashed her a cute smile. Hairi was overwhelmed by his expression and ran to embrace him, her arms wrapping tightly around his small body. Overcome with emotion, she promised to do her best to be helpful. Her happiness burst forth, but the embrace planted Kotaro's face directly into her chest, turning his cheeks red. She quickly apologized, explaining that she was simply overjoyed and found Kotaro's smile too adorable to resist. Even through the warmth of the moment, Kotaro's thoughts remained guarded. He questioned whether this woman was trying to deceive him, yet he could sense no bloodlust from her. It defied everything he'd come to expect from people. How could someone like her even exist? But he dismissed the thought. No, the only person he could truly trust was himself. Kindness, it was a weakness, a dulling of the senses. That was exactly what they wanted, to tame him, break him, turn him into their obedient dog. That mindset, that poison, was their weapon. In this life, he wouldn't suppress who he was. Not anymore. As long as his heart remained chained, he would never grasp true freedom. And so, as his thoughts faded, he drifted into sleep. Hairi, watching him closely, whispered softly that he had overexerted himself. Kotaro could barely fight the sleep overtaking him. He admitted to himself that it was partly because of his baby body, but ever since arriving in this world, he had felt an unfamiliar comfort. He wondered how long it had been since he'd felt so at ease while sleeping. The constant killing intent that had once surrounded him was now gone. As he lay in Hairi's lap, she looked down at him tenderly. She whispered that he was no longer alone in this world, that she was by his side. A flash from the past then revealed how Hairi had first found him. She had reached the Sky Castle and come upon the aftermath of a brutal battle. Goblin corpses lay scattered, victims of Kotaro's hand. Stunned by the carnage, she questioned who had done this. Then she cast a memory-reading spell. Placing a finger on his head, the spell activated, and Kotaro's memories flowed into her. She saw everything. His life as a child raised among ninjas, the cold glares filled with killing intent as he slept. But even then, Kotaro wasn't caught off guard. She watched him eliminate the assassins one by one. The memory of his execution followed, then his fierce battle against the Goblin King. After killing all the goblins, he sat alone on the floor, a dark, menacing look on his face. Everything he had endured, every struggle, every betrayal, unfolded before her. And as those memories washed over her, Hairi was brought to tears. Hairi held Kotaro gently in her arms, her thoughts stirring deeply within. To suppress one's emotions for an entire lifetime, such a terrifying fate. That was the way of the ninja. One misstep, and they could be consumed by the demonkin. Yet within this child's heart, she saw a glimmer of light. No matter how lonely he was, he never lost hope. His heart had not surrendered to despair. It was the heart of a hero. In this life, she wished for him to know love. He was no longer alone. As she sat quietly on a rock, the Goblin King began to rise again. His body was mauled, limbs twisted and broken, yet he staggered back up. Disbelief twisted across his face as he struggled to accept the reality that a human baby had done this to him, that he, the mighty Goblin King, had been brought this low. Fury surged within him as he prepared to attack again. But just then, Kotaro stirred awake in Hairi's arms. His eyes snapped open, fixing the Goblin King with a sharp, piercing glare. Without hesitation, Kotaro raised a hand, and in a single, effortless motion, he obliterated the Goblin King entirely. Hairi sat still, unaware of what had just transpired. She continued to cradle Kotaro, who had already drifted back to sleep. Time passed in silence until she noticed something flying in the air above. The creature locked eyes with her. In response, she immediately cast a spell Air Rend and brought the creature down from the sky. As it plummeted, She swiftly grabbed her cloak and threw it on. Panic flickered across her face as she processed what had just happened. Had they been detected by the demonkin? The quickest way out of the demon realm was through the former forest of the giant tree. But there was no other option now. She had to go through the great rotwood forest. Elsewhere, an image of Hyrie was being projected through magic. A voice echoed in a dark chamber, reporting directly to the demon lord. The voice belonged to one of 10 shadowy figures gathered in the pitch-black room, centered around a massive, mystical eye. The report was simple. Hyrie Titania, the Fairy King, had been located. A soft, amused response came from the demon lord. One of the other figures chuckled, expressing surprise that she was still alive. Another scoffed, calling it a pointless report. Others agreed, claiming she had lost her former power. The image shifted to reveal the baby in her arms. What truly concerned them now was the child. As the scene played, showing Kotaro battling the Goblin King and tearing through other goblins with brutal ease, the room grew still with interest. Someone questioned whether the child could truly be just a baby. Another simply giggled. Then the demon lord gave his command. 10 demons were to kidnap the baby and kill the elf. The 10 figures responded in unison, accepting the order. A massive explosion shattered the forest as the scene shifted once again. Hyrie was running through dense woods, being relentlessly pursued by demons. She cursed under her breath. There were too many of them. In her arms, Kotaro's eyes were wide with excitement. The enormous creatures chasing them filled him with awe and curiosity. Hyrie urged him not to get too excited. If he fell now, they'd have no chance. They were outnumbered. The only option was to run. Suddenly, creatures descended from above, catching her by surprise. Without missing a beat, she cast the Grand Air Rupture spell, obliterating them midair. Kotaro watched from the safety of her arms, thoroughly impressed. He had never seen a ninjutsu like that before. This girl was quite skilled. But before he could finish the thought, a massive creature swooped down from above, threatening to strike. Fear overtook Hyrie's expression as she looked up, realizing the danger was far from over. Panic was written all over Hyrie's face as she clutched Kotaro tightly. She silently cursed herself, longing for the strength she once had. In stark contrast, Kotaro wore an excited expression as the monstrous creature lunged toward them. But before it could reach them, several small, winged, fairy-like beings appeared in the air, positioning themselves between the monster and the pair. One of the tiny creatures floated up to the beast, confronting it with a claim. It insisted the prey was theirs. The creature abruptly froze, then retreated in fear, vanishing into the distance. Kotaro's eyes widened in surprise as he looked up at the strange new arrivals. One of the fairy-like beings swiftly turned its attention to them and flew closer. Its cheerful form suddenly twisted, revealing a demonic face filled with disdain as it accused them of trespassing and called Hyrie a filthy elfkin. Fury surged through it as it prepared to attack. Hyrie looked up at the creatures cautiously, her thoughts steady and resolute. She knew deep down this was a path she could no longer avoid. Kotaro, meanwhile, looked at the fairies with bright, gleaming eyes, fascinated by their strangeness. The fairies began shouting at them, voices filled with hatred. They called Hyrie an irritating elfkin and demanded she hand over the baby so they could devour her. But before they could act, Kotaro suddenly launched forward, slipping his fingers between the thighs of the startled fairies. Their faces flushed red with embarrassment as they screamed in shock. One cried out in confusion, another in horror, calling him a pervert. Hyrie gasped when she realized Kotaro had vanished from her arms. She tried to warn him. These were no ordinary beings. They were vicious creatures, and provoking them was incredibly dangerous. But Kotaro, still smiling, called out in excitement, fascinated by the flying inchling creatures. As Hyrie looked at him, something swelled in her heart. That pure, innocent smile. Seeing it made her truly happy. She was overwhelmed with joy that Kotaro had finally been freed from the lonely life he once endured. One of the fairies seethed with anger, calling Kotaro a ridiculous brat and threatening to paralyze him. A green thorn began forming in its mouth. The fairy fired it toward Kotaro, and Hairi recognized it instantly. Poison needles. The rest of the fairies followed suit, launching more thorns his way. But Kotaro reacted in the blink of an eye. He caught the incoming thorns using both his hands and feet, halting the attack entirely. The fairies froze in panic as he met their gaze with a menacing glare. Without hesitation, he hurled the thorns back at them. They struck their targets, piercing the fairies' bodies. Screams of pain echoed through the air before they collapsed to the ground. Defeated. One of the dying fairies, disbelief in her fading voice, muttered that those movements weren't human at all. Kotaro landed calmly, the rush of battle fading from his face. His thoughts were cold and sharp. He couldn't help but react when faced with killing intent. It always managed to ruin his good mood. Then, as if the battle had taken nothing from him, he simply thought to himself how sleepy he was. Suddenly, a massive thorn shot toward him. But before it could strike, Hairi snatched him up and fled. As she ran, blood poured from a fresh wound. She had been struck while protecting him. Kotaro looked up at her, his eyes wide as the reality sank in. Hairi stumbled and collapsed to the ground, trembling as blood gushed from her injury. She clenched her teeth, cursing the fact that the thorn had grazed her. Laughter echoed from one of the fairies lying on the ground, her voice weak but mocking. A large creature began approaching from the distance. The fairy announced its arrival. It was their mama. A towering, more sinister fairy-like being appeared. Its presence cast a shadow over the wounded Hairi. In a voice heavy with recognition and mockery, the creature addressed her directly, calling her by name. Hairi looked up in stunned disbelief. It was Elva. Elva, the fairy king, demanded that Hairi hand over the baby. Her eyes burned with ambition as she declared that, after killing Hairi, she would finally be recognized as one of the 10 demons. The words struck Hairi with disbelief. The idea that Elva would join the demonkin was almost too much to comprehend. Before she could say more, Elva silenced her with a roar. With a grotesque motion, she began pulling a weapon out from deep within her throat. How it was hidden there was a mystery in itself. I think we should call her the Throat Queen instead. As the weapon slid free, she made her stance clear. She would no longer follow orders from the Elfkin. After extracting her weapon, Elva launched a sudden attack. Hairi barely managed to dodge as the blast tore through the forest, obliterating a tree behind her. Elva noted Hairi's resilience with a mocking tone, explaining that her venom attack was so concentrated it could corrode and melt anything. She promised the next blow would finish her off. Landing on the ground, Hairi's resolve flared. She vowed never to hand Kotaro over. Kotaro, still cradled in her arms, looked up at her with wide, dazed eyes. Without hesitation, Elva unleashed her next move, Fairy King's Grand Sword Dance. A massive explosion erupted, devastating the surrounding area. But just before the destruction could reach Hairi, Kotaro raised a single finger and stopped the attack in its tracks. A strange feeling washed over Kotaro. In his thoughts, he admitted to himself that he couldn't abandon this girl. Face to face now, Elva stared at him in shock. The baby had stopped her sword strike with one finger. It all began to make sense. Now she understood why the demonkin were after him. He wasn't an ordinary baby. Kotaro, meanwhile, lamented the limitations of his body. It lacked stamina, but for a technique of that level, he could manage. With that, he launched his own counterattack, ninjutsu Finger Sever. The technique cut through Elva's body effortlessly. Blood spewed from her mouth as she staggered back, stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Before Kotaro could finish her, Hairi stepped in, pleading for him to wait. She asked him not to kill Elva. Elva, still trying to hold herself together, questioned Hairi's actions. Hairi answered with conviction. She wanted to save her. Kotaro looked up at Hairi as she began recounting the past. Once upon a time, the Elfkin and the Fairykin lived together in peace within the forest. It had been a bountiful land known as the Forest of the Giant Tree. The Elf King and Fairy King had formed an alliance. Elfkin governed with wisdom, while Fairykin, with their strength and numbers, defended their shared home. But that alliance had a darker truth. The Fairykin were used by the Elfkin, seen as inferior in civilization and intelligence. Over time, resentment and hatred grew. War broke out between the two races. Hyri had been young then, powerless to do anything. Kotaro, remembering his previous life, mused that it was the same in every world, those who used and those who were used. And now, here was a girl with such spirited conviction, even at her young age. When Hyri revealed that this war had happened only 150 years ago, Kotaro was taken aback. Was this girl older than him? What kind of world was this? Elva, meanwhile, dismissed Hyri's words. She called the story an old tale that rotted the ears. As she spoke, she transformed. The poison, she said, should have already coursed through Hyri's body. She was ready to kill her, ready to ease the regrets of the Fairykin by ending the life of a princess. Hyri tried desperately to stop her, crying out that this conflict was meaningless and would only lead to destruction. But Elva would not be swayed. She screamed that this was her mission. Once, during the war, she too had been a princess. That they, two surviving princesses, should meet again like this was fate. She had to kill Hyri to fulfill that destiny. With a flash, the magic rune around her neck activated. Hyri recognized it instantly. It was a contract seal. She was horrified. Elva had made a pact. Elva confirmed it. They were in the same position, so Hyri should understand. The power flowing through her now had been bestowed by the Demon Lord. A memory surfaced, one from Hyri and Elva's childhood. Hyri had turned to Elva, a quiet weight behind her words, as she asked why conflict never seemed to end in the world. She spoke of the humankin, demonkin, beastkin, how everyone was simply a living being trying to exist. She mentioned the elfkin and the fairykin, and the hope that one day, Elva, smiling gently, assured her that the forest would be fine. Her words made Hyri's eyes sparkle with a quiet hope. Elva reminded her that they had always been friends, and that nothing would change that. Hyri had frozen at the warmth in that reassurance, then smiled as the thought echoed within her. Yes, they would always be friends. The memory faded. In the present, Elva was still mid-transformation. Her voice rose with manic power, proclaiming the overwhelming force surging through her, the power of the demonkin, granted to her by the Demon Lord himself. And she declared that it was all for the purpose of killing Hyri. As Hyri watched the changes overtaking her old friend, her heart sank. She recognized the contract seal that marked Elva. A horrified thought passed through her mind. What had Elva done? If she accepted such a seal, she would only become a tool of the demonkin. Hyri had saved her own power for one person, but for Elva's sake she would use it. And now, laughter burst from Elva. She mocked Hyri for being too scared to even speak, then screamed for her to die. Elva unleashed a powerful technique, Fairy King's Grand Sword Dance. Crucifix. A massive explosion shattered the land, shaking the earth beneath them. Elva's laughter rang through the devastation, wild and victorious. She declared that she had crushed Hyri to pieces. Suddenly, magic power began to surge violently from the spot where Elva's devastating attack had struck. A sphere of magical energy intensified at the center, and from within it, Hyri emerged, her form transformed. Majestic, angelic wings unfurled from her back as she released the powers she had long kept sealed away. Elva was stunned. The overwhelming magical pressure crashing against her senses was something she couldn't comprehend. This level of power, impossible. Hyri was supposed to have lost her strength long ago. How could this be? Hyri then began casting spells with clarity and purpose. First, a status ailment complete recovery spell. Then, a stamina complete recovery spell. Her body, covered in wounds, healed instantly. Kotaro, cradled in her arms, began to stir. He felt his body grow light, and the heavy sleep that had weighed him down began to lift. Confusion washed over him as he tried to understand what was happening. Elva's eyes widened in disbelief. A high-level spell, this power, It could only be the magic Hyrie once wielded when she was known as the Great Sage Hyrie Titania. Hyrie's magic continued to surge with radiant strength as she raised a hand and pointed directly at Elva. With a firm, compassionate voice, she declared her intention to save her. She cast freezing sacred stigmata. A powerful bolt of magical energy tore through the air and struck Elva square in the chest. The demonic energy that had corrupted her began to dissipate, unraveling in wisps around her as she stood frozen before Hyrie. Hyrie then spoke. She told Elva that she was no longer bound by anything, that there were things she wanted to protect more than the regrets of their people. Because, above all else, they were friends. Tears welled up in Elva's eyes. The memories came flooding back. Hyrie too remembered. Something from over 100 years ago. They had lost the war, and that should have been the end of it. So why now? Why had it all gone so wrong? Elva remembered the moment it all changed, when she listened to their words and let herself be led astray. Now on his feet, Kotaro reached out a hand toward Elva. Hyrie did the same, both of them extending their hands to her. Elva, caught in the warmth of Kotaro's radiant smile, hesitated, then slowly reached out to him. But before their hands could touch, a violent force crashed down from above. A figure slammed into Elva, driving her mercilessly into the ground. Kotaro stood frozen in shock. The figure who had struck Elva down looked upon the scene with disdain. Receiving a bestowal seal from the demon lord, only to end up like this? How unforgivable. What a boring ending. Apru, one of the 10 demons, stood triumphantly atop Elva's body, laughter erupting from her. The twisted joy on her face revealed her delight in watching her opponent writhe in agony. This moment, for her, was pure bliss. Hyrie's power began to surge, her anger intensifying at the scene before her. Kotaro stood frozen, his eyes wide in shock at what had just occurred. Apru, still smirking, commented on Elva's condition, noting how the body transformation caused by the contract seal was going haywire. Something she believed someone like Elva clearly couldn't handle. Fueled by rage, Hyrie drew even more power into herself. Without hesitation, she activated a transfer spell, instantly teleporting both Kotaro and Elva to her side. Without wasting a moment, Hyrie unleashed another powerful incantation, the Karmic Inferno Annihilation spell. A colossal blast of energy erupted from her hand, tearing through the surroundings in a devastating explosion. When the dust began to settle, Hyrie could be seen hovering in the air, panting from the immense energy she had just expended. Elva remained unconscious, floating beside her, while Kotaro drifted nearby, his expression twisted with anger. Despite the overwhelming blast, the dust cleared to reveal Apru still standing in the exact same spot, untouched. She coughed slightly, brushing some dirt off herself, then complained about the sudden attack and the mess it had left on her. Hyrie, eyes narrowed, realized that even her most powerful fire spell had done nothing. She commented on the full ability enhancement granted by the contract seal, expressing disbelief that her strongest magic had failed. Apru's grin widened as she declared that she was truly angry now. With a sudden burst of energy, she launched herself toward Hyrie at incredible speed. Hyrie reacted swiftly, casting a barrier creation spell that raised boulders from the ground, encasing herself and the others in a protective shell. But Apru was undeterred. As she approached the barrier, she declared it useless, her voice echoing with confidence. She then executed the exploding demon fist, her attack shattering the stone barrier completely. As the last of the debris crumbled around them, Apru stood there with a wild smile, victorious even against the protective magic. Hyrie stood firm, already preparing another attack against Apru. She unleashed the ancient spell Freezing Sacred Stigmata, and streams of energy surged from her fingertips, striking Apru directly. But as the light faded, Apru remained unfazed. She let out a playful exclamation, remarking on how close the attack had come and recognizing the spell as the ancient magic known as Freezing Sacred Stigmata, proof of Hyrie's status as the strongest among the elfkin, known as the Great Sage. Then, with a mocking smirk, she corrected herself, former Great Sage. Hairi dropped to her knees, her body trembling, completely drained from the relentless magic she had expended. She stared down at her hands, shocked by the emptiness within. Her voice trembled with disbelief as she realized her magic was fully depleted. Apru looked down at her with disappointment. The thrill of combat faded from her expression as she scoffed at how little strength remained in the once great mage. She mused aloud whether Hairi's true power had been sealed within a magic stone and had only returned temporarily. Whatever the case, it no longer mattered. She told Hairi to just die. But before she ended it, Apru leaned forward with a smirk and said she would share something interesting. Something she had also once told the Fairy King. A flashback appeared, showing Elva kneeling before the 10 demons. Apru stood in front of her, speaking directly to her. She asked if Elva was okay with how things were, the regret of her comrades, the humiliation. She spoke of the wonderfully furious emotion hidden deep inside her, and questioned whether she was going to live her life suppressing it. She told Elva to be angry, to let her anger out, saying that dark emotion was fitting for a demonkin. Apru claimed the demon lord would be pleased, and that with her power, the power of the fairykin as a warrior race, it would be enough. Back in the present, Apru laughed hysterically. She said she had only been kidding, calling Elva as dumb as a bug. She mocked the fairykin, saying they were numerous and worked well as pawns, easy to use. Then she pointed out that Hairi, as an elfkin, would know that very well. Hairi shouted back at her in anger, trembling, saying she had toyed with her best friend. Apru looked at her expression and said she was making such a great face, that she was definitely worth killing. Kotaro, still floating in the air, grew angry as he listened to Apru's words. Apru stood over Hairi, a twisted grin on her face, as she relished the frustration etched into her opponent's expression. With a burst of manic energy, she declared her intention to send Hairi to her grave. Hairi, barely able to contain her rage, spat out her fury, cursing Apru as a demonkin. Unfazed, Apru relished the moment, eager to hear Hairi's final scream. She began gathering power, preparing to unleash a devastating attack. As she launched her signature move, Exploding Demon Fist, a sudden figure shot between them. Kotaro intervened in a blur of motion, intercepting the barrage of attacks. He caught Apru's fist mid-strike and stood firm between her and Hairi. Apru's eyes widened in disbelief, stunned that he had managed to halt her assault. The air changed as Kotaro fixed a menacing glare on her. A wave of danger rolled off him, making Apru instinctively shriek. Without hesitation, Kotaro activated a technique, ninjutsu redirection. As the energy from Apru's attack was returned, her body was ripped apart, obliterated into scattered chunks. Redirection, a fundamental ninja taijutsu technique that temporarily stores received force within the body before releasing it. Hairi watched in awe, whispering in amazement at what she had just witnessed. Internally, Kotaro reflected on his nature. Killing had always been everything to him. Killing others, killing his enemies, eliminating all emotion. He had believed himself to be nothing more than a heartless ninja. But now, something felt different. He hadn't wanted to lose that girl. A strange, unfamiliar feeling stirred within him. Sympathy, affection, compassion, sadness, grief. Were these signs that he, too, still possessed a human heart? Tears slipped down his face as he questioned it all. On the ground, Apru's mangled body twitched, barely moving. She struggled to comprehend what had just happened, muttering in disbelief. That technique had bypassed even the protection granted by the Demon Lord's contract seal. Hairi realized the truth. Kotaro's ninjutsu wasn't from this world. It pierced through even the most powerful enhancements, including the contract seal's full body protection. Though broken, Apru chuckled and cast a full stamina recovery spell, her body rapidly healing and returning to form. With a twisted joy, she proclaimed her affection for Kotaro, reveling in the darkness behind his eyes. The eyes of someone who had killed countless times, someone who bore despair, loneliness, and hatred. She recognized him as a kindred spirit, broken by suffering, and insisted he belonged with the demonkin. She invited him to join them and rule the world together. Kotaro froze for a moment, her words lingering in his mind. The strong rule the weak, he thought. This world is no different from the era I lived in. Rule. Ha! He stuck out his tongue mockingly in response. Aproo burst into laughter, amused by his defiance. But then her expression darkened. Her body began to transform, growing into a massive, muscular form. She promised to take him back by force and declared her intention to half-kill him. As energy surged around her, Hairi looked on in shock. The sheer intensity of Aproo's power was overwhelming. This was the full might of one of the 10 demons. Aproo gathered all her strength and prepared to strike, unleashing full power, exploding demon fist. Just before attacking, she vowed to make Kotaro submit through sheer power alone, convinced he would eventually join the demonkin. Hairi panicked, believing even Kotaro's powerful ninjutsu must have a limit. This attack, she feared, would be too much. She screamed for Kotaro to run. Kotaro, however, raised his hand calmly, blocking the incoming attack. The ground beneath him shattered, but he stood his ground. Aproo was left stunned at his resilience. In response, Kotaro once again invoked ninjutsu, redirection, turning the force of Aproo's own power against her. The resulting blast completely destroyed her body, leaving Hairi in utter shock. As the dust settled, Kotaro stood firm and declared with quiet defiance that he hated those who dominated. After finishing off Aproo, Kotaro remained standing for a moment. His eyelids grew heavy, and his body began to sway, exhausted from the battle. Hairi quickly rushed to his side, embracing him tightly. She thanked him for saving them and urged him to rest. Slowly, Kotaro closed his eyes and drifted into sleep in her arms. Nearby, Elva lay on the ground, chuckling weakly as she watched. She marveled at the strength of the humankin baby who had managed to obliterate one of the 10 demons with a single blow. Hairi's eyes widened in surprise upon seeing her alive, and she immediately moved to heal her. But Elva stopped her, telling her it was no use. Elva explained that she had lived too long. Now that the power of the contract seal had been lost, her body would only decay. It was inevitable. She lamented how the fairykin had overreached, trying to obtain more than they deserved, and how they could never defeat the elfkin in anything. She urged Hairi to go on. Her journey had only just begun. The pursuers would soon come. The demonkin would stop at nothing to get their hands on the baby. With her final strength, Elva reached out her hand and released a burst of magical energy toward Hairi. She told her to take it as a parting gift. Hairi looked down and found herself wearing a new pair of winged shoes, S-rank equipment known as the fairy boots. They would triple her speed, allow slight levitation, and make her harder to detect by enemies. She was astonished at how light her body suddenly felt. Elva instructed her that if she had nowhere else to go, she should head far east of the forest, beyond the Warlord Mountains to a place called Hydrat. It was the only land in the world not yet turned into a demonic realm. It was still resisting the demonkin and stood as the last stronghold. There, strong individuals from around the world were being gathered. With the boy at her side, she might just... Elva's voice trailed off as her body began to wither away. Hairi forced a smile and corrected her, saying that Kotaro wasn't just a companion. He was her equal, her friend, a fellow party member, just like the elfkin and fairykin once were. She promised to make their dream a reality, a peaceful world where no one dominated anyone else. Elva's fading body stirred with memories of their childhood. A smile crossed her face before she completely vanished. Her parting words floated in the air as her remains disappeared, saying she would be looking forward to it. Hairi stood still, tears running down her cheeks, and quietly wished Elva to rest in peace. The scene shifted. On the ground lay Aproo's severed eye. In a sudden burst of energy, her entire body regenerated. Panic and disbelief overtook her expression. She couldn't believe she had survived. and realized it was thanks to the Demon Lord's contract seal. Shocked and unsettled, she tried to process how Kotaro had deflected her full-powered demonic fist technique. She knew now he wasn't normal. Then a voice rang out in her mind. The Demon Lord's voice. He expressed his disappointment in her. Aproo gasped and stammered in fear, addressing him with desperation. He reminded her how he had picked her up when she was near death after the annihilation of her clan by the humankin, and how he had granted her power. As the contract seal around her neck began to tighten, choking her, he mocked her origins, calling the ogrekin a weak and lowly species. Aproo begged him to wait. She reminded him of the torment she had inflicted on others and vowed to continue meeting his expectations. But her pleas were in vain. Her eyes rolled back and she collapsed to the ground. As her body shriveled, the life drained from her. From a tree beside her, a dark figure emerged. A low, sinister chuckle escaped his lips as he declared that he would take all the credit. This was Azura's, another of the 10 demons. We now switch scenes and see Hairi dashing through the forest. As she dashed out into a clearing, she stopped at the edge of a cliff, breathing heavily. She spoke between ragged breaths, relieved that they had made it. Kotaro slowly opened his eyes. Hairi informed him that they had arrived at the Warlord Mountains. She explained that this was the place where the Demon Lord and the Heroes Party had once fought, and even now, the battle against the Demonkin continued day and night. She told him that the only place in the world not yet influenced by the Demonkin was the royal capital, Hydrat, which lay beyond the mountains. Her thoughts turned inward. She believed that Miria must still be fighting. She turned again to Kotaro, telling him that the people of Hydrat were desperately hoping for strong individuals like him. We now switch to a battlefield. Warriors from Hydrat were locked in combat with demons. One of the demons complained that no matter how many humans they killed, they just kept coming. A warrior shouted back in defiance as he charged forward to attack. Nearby, a priest was using her magic to heal another wounded warrior. The injured warrior strained to speak, urging everyone to hold on just a little longer, hoping that reinforcements would soon arrive. Suddenly, a group of demons advanced on the priest. They shouted their intent to kill her and stop the healing. They dashed toward her, ready to strike. Before they could reach her, all of the demons were cut down in an instant. The priest looked on in surprise, her eyes falling on a woman with 2 massive swords standing over the fallen demons, her presence overwhelming. One of the warriors shouted with shock and relief, recognizing her and declaring that they were saved. It was Miria. This woman was one of the 4 great heroes, Miria Barbados. She glared at the demons and expressed her disgust at their stench, saying she couldn't stand the smell of the demonkin. She vowed to kill every last one of them. The demons froze in fear. One of them recognized her and cried out, calling her the war god. Without hesitation, Miria dashed forward, cutting through the demons like they were nothing. We now switch back to Hairi. She was dashing across the land. As she moved forward, she went past where Miria was taking down the demons. Miria suddenly stopped and noticed the air. She questioned the smell of blood, noting how thick the scent was, unlike anything she had ever smelled before. It felt as if it clung to the very soul. Overwhelmed by the intense smell of blood, she shouted out, vowing to kill and not let the demonkin escape. She then dashed off after Hairi. When she reached her, Hairi smiled and said her name. Miria paused her attack. She recognized Hairi and called out her name with surprise. On another part of the battlefield, Azraz emerged. He spoke aloud, noting that they had indeed fled to the Warlord Mountains. He called it his ideal battlefield. Referring to Kotaro, he remarked that he was not to be underestimated. He then declared that he would take this opportunity and slaughter them all, laughing as he said it. Miria's voice trembled with shock as she questioned why Hairi was there. Her gaze then dropped to the small child in Hairi's arms, clearly stunned to see a human baby. As she processed the sight, Kotaro suddenly vanished from Hairi's grasp and appeared atop Miria's head, tugging fiercely on her ears. She screamed in surprise, flailing as she tried to understand what was happening. The sensation tickled unbearably, and she couldn't believe the baby had gotten up there so quickly. Confused and frustrated, she tried to make sense of how he had managed to climb onto her head in the first place. In a burst of irritation, she grabbed Kotaro and hurled him to the ground, yelling furiously. Hairi let out a startled scream, horrified to see the baby flung so roughly. Before anyone could react further, a series of violent explosions erupted around them. As the dust settled, eerie pillars of skeletons began emerging from the earth. Both Miria and Hairi stared in shock at the grotesque sight. Off in the distance, Azraz chuckled to himself, watching the chaos unfold. He mused that this place had long been a battlefield, soaked in centuries of war. With tens of thousands of corpses at his command, he began casting a spell. The spell, tens of thousands of evil brutes, necromancy spell, took hold as the skeletal army shot towards the group. Azraz reveled in the moment, laughing at the absurdity and satisfaction of it all. To him, it was comical to see the foolish dead humans killing one another, all now under his control. As the horde of skeletons closed in, Miria launched into battle, slicing through the undead with ease. As she fought, she realized what these creatures were and cursed the demonkin for continually doing things that infuriated her. With a fierce shout, she unleashed an attack called Fang Sword, cutting through the skeletons in swift, precise strikes. For a moment, silence fell. Then more skeletons burst from the ground. Hairi, overwhelmed, realized the onslaught had no end. Her face was painted with fear and disbelief. Miria pressed forward, slashing relentlessly as she spoke, trying to deduce that somewhere nearby a demonkin must be controlling them. But before she could finish her thought, she let out another surprised scream. Kotaro had latched onto her tail. The sensation caught her off guard. He clung to it tightly, clearly enjoying its fluffiness. Miria, utterly exasperated, threw him to the ground again, this time even more furiously. Her frustration boiled over as she threatened to end his antics once and for all. Suddenly, Azraz made his move. He launched an attack called Gatu, Hungry Blade, unleashing a barrage of bones at the group. As the razor-sharp bones shot through the air, he proclaimed the power behind them. Bones hardened over hundreds of years, now capable of piercing anything in their path. He roared his intent to kill. Miria's eyes locked onto him as she detected him. The scent in the air told her everything. Azraz had finally shown himself. His fighting style irritated her beyond reason, and she called him a coward for hiding for so long. Azraz, however, showed no remorse. He taunted her further, questioning her anger and calling the humans mere toys for the demonkin. He mocked the weakness of humankind and declared that if the demon lord had truly wanted to, he could have destroyed Hydrat in a single night. He laughed, finding it all amusing, delightful, and deeply satisfying. As Miria tried to deflect the vicious assault, her sword suddenly snapped under the pressure. She stared in disbelief as the blades broke in her hands. Then, without warning, Kotaro appeared in front of her. He floated effortlessly in the air, and in that moment, Miria sensed something strange. Her eyes widened as she realized the scent filling the battlefield didn't come from Hairi. It was far more intense, an overwhelming smell of blood clinging to the very soul itself. It was coming from Kotaro. She finally understood that this child was no ordinary human. Meanwhile, Kotaro regarded the skeletal army with disdain. To him, controlling corpses was a mundane technique, nothing worth fearing. He raised a hand and activated a forbidden technique of his own. Fuma's 12 forbidden arts, summoning from the underworld. The ancient ninjutsu of the Fuuma was known to surpass all ordinary techniques. Even the famed ninja clans, Iga, Koga, Seseki, Mochizuki, Nagoro, could not hope to reach the hidden realm it drew power from. Yet, by repeatedly wandering the border between life and death, some Fuuma practitioners had achieved something unthinkable. They could communicate with the dead. The techniques they mastered through relentless, near-insane training were feared, earning them the label of monsters. It was said that Fuuma ninjutsu was as vast and boundless as the spirits of the underworld themselves. As Azura's fired off his attack, Kotaro calmly prepared his response. In his mind, he invoked the ancient rite, calling upon the sleeping souls of the land through a blood oath. He let his blood drip from his palm onto the earth, performing one of Fuma's most feared techniques, summoning from the underworld, one of the 12 forbidden arts. A towering pillar of blood erupted from the ground. From within the crimson torrent, a figure began to emerge, slowly materializing in the air before Kotaro. Miria watched, stunned, a strange sense of familiarity washing over her. Hairi too felt it. Wings unfurled from the back of the figure as its form solidified. Azura's attack continued towards the group, but the creature blocked it effortlessly. With a trembling voice, Azura's tried to understand what he was seeing. At that moment, realization dawned upon him, Miria, and Hairi all at once. The one who had emerged was none other than the demon lord Servain. Kotaro smiled at the sight. Servain now stood between him and Azura's. Azura's stuttered in disbelief, recognizing him as the previous demon lord, one who had been miraculously defeated 100 years ago. Miria struggled to comprehend what was happening. She recalled how impossible it had been to defeat Servain even back then, and now, without Arslad, their odds were non-existent. Servain dropped to one knee before Kotaro, calmly asking what he was to do next. Kotaro looked at him in silence while Miria stood frozen in shock. Hairi could hardly process the sight. Servain, the former demon lord, was obeying Kotaro as though he were his master. Azura's was shocked. He couldn't believe that Kotaro summoned the previous demon lord and made him obedient. He refused to accept it. He stuck his hand in the ground and used his bone magic to summon the skeletons from below for his next attack. He then shouted his identity as one of the 10 demons and swore to destroy both Kotaro and the demon lord. He trapped Servain with a barrage of bones and descended from above with a massive bone strike. Servain, unfazed, raised a single finger. The attack halted on impact. Azura's could only mutter in disbelief before Servain retaliated. With nothing more than a flick of a finger, a massive explosion was unleashed. It blasted Azura's away and completely obliterated the surrounding terrain. As the dust settled, Servain turned to Kotaro and once again knelt. He asked what his master wished of him now. Kotaro simply responded with an innocent smile. Azura's, one of the feared 10 demons, had been killed in an instant. Hairi, watching the scene unfold, processed the reality before her. Kotaro had made the real former demon lord his subordinate. She knew it was no illusion. Miria, startled by the turn of events, demanded answers from Hairi. She reminded her that she had left claiming she was searching for the seed of hope, and now she was asking if this child was truly that hope. Hairi confirmed it without hesitation. Kotaro was the hope of their world. Servain, the once defeated demon lord, began surveying the battlefield. He took in the sight of the fallen demons scattered across the area. With a weary tone, he reflected on how despite the countless decades or centuries since his fall, nothing had changed. Not Miria, not the world. Miria, angered by his words, lashed out. She blamed the demon kin for the chaos and suffering in the world, furious at his detached disappointment. Servain calmly replied, pointing out that it was they who originally ruled. His words struck Miria silent. Servain spoke with a detached tone, explaining that the demon kin had been oppressed for so long. He had simply carried that resentment because it was his fate, born as the strongest among all demon kin. But now none of it mattered anymore. The world, in his eyes, was full of heedless fools. He then turned to Kotaro and asked what his wish was, referring to him as his lord. Deep inside, Servain wondered if he was destined once again to fight and kill as a familiar. Kotaro smiled softly, and his thoughts echoed a desire for peace. He didn't want to dominate anyone. Struggling to find the words, he finally managed to say that he hated domination and that Servain was free. The words stunned Servain. He froze, unable to believe what he had just heard. Miria, still trying to comprehend the situation, turned to Hairi in disbelief, demanding an explanation. Hairi, tears flowing down her face, couldn't believe that Kotaro had spoken. She picked him up gently and expressed her agreement with his words. She too hated domination. Servain let out a laugh. He acknowledged that there were still unusual beings in the world. He looked at Kotaro, who remained in Hairi's arms, and after a short pause asked if Kotaro truly wanted him to come along. Kotaro continued to smile in response. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to rumble, catching everyone off guard. Cracks split the earth, and from below, two massive hands erupted upward, shooting toward the sky. The group found themselves lifted and standing in the palm of the giant hands. Hairi immediately checked on Kotaro, asking if he was all right. Kotaro responded with a cheerful, innocent sound. Miria looked around, confused and irritated, wondering what was happening now. They stood silently for a moment before realizing that they were no longer alone. Figures had appeared, standing on the tips of the enormous fingers. A dark, foul aura clung to the air around them. Miria narrowed her eyes and muttered in disgust that the place reeked, absolutely reeked, of the bloody stench of demon kin. The demon lord's presence bore down on them from above, heavy and suffocating. As the group stood together in the middle of the massive hand, the eyes of the 10 demons fixed on them with unrelenting intensity. Miria, sensing the overwhelming force radiating from above, struggled to comprehend the power on display, power far beyond what she had imagined of the new demon lord. Meanwhile, Kotaro, exhausted from summoning Servain, had fallen asleep in Hairi's arms. Hairi, her gaze sharp, assessed the situation. She couldn't believe that all the 10 demons came at once. Their goal was clear: they were coming to claim Kotaro. Her eyes narrowed as she focused on one of the 10 demons, staring at him in silence. Servain remained still as well, calmly observing the unfolding chaos. Then, laughter erupted from one of the demons. Noting that killing number 10, Apru, and number 9, Azraz, had opened up rare vacancies among the 10 demons, a first in decades. The demon lord, it said, was thrilled by this unexpected disruption and demanded that they now entertain them. The speaker was Zenova, ranked number 3 among the 10 demons. Despite his fatigue, Kotaro struggled to stay conscious in Hairi's arms. His mind raced with frustration over his helplessness, lamenting the limitations of his infant body. As tensions rose, Miria snapped. Enraged by Zenova's words, she lunged forward, determined to fight back. Before she could land a blow, however, a sudden magical blast struck her, piercing a square-shaped hole through her body. The attack came from another of the 10 demons, Deporapopper number 4, who dismissed her coldly, stating that the 4 heroes were no longer needed. Hairi shouted in shock at what had happened to Miria, who herself was stunned as she looked at the geometric wound carved into her torso. But before she could recover, a second attack struck her. This time, her entire body was encased in a crystalline substance, locking her in place. Laughter echoed from the one responsible, Hildark number 7, who admired his handiwork, declaring her his newest art piece. Hairi began to panic at the horrifying sight, but her alarm was cut short when something smashed into her, pinning her violently to the ground. A strange creature loomed over her, and a child sat on its head, grinning wickedly. The child called her a weakling and ordered her to stay down. These two together were April and Galen, ranked number 8 among the 10 demons. Hairi screamed as Kotaro's small body was flung from her grasp, bouncing across the ground until it landed beside Servain. As Servain looked down at the baby, yet another demon charged at him, sword raised for an attack. With calm precision, Servain raised his hand and blocked the strike effortlessly. He recognized the attacker immediately: Arzlad, number 2 of the 10 demons. Watching the encounter unfold, Hairi knew what had to be done. The only way to save Arzlad now was to kill him. Then, suddenly, a hand rested gently on Servain's shoulder. Without warning, a figure materialized beside him. A demon, smiling casually, greeted him. This was none other than the demon Lord Jura. Jura apologized, explaining that anything he directly touched would break due to the overwhelming strength of his magical power. However, he noted that something like this should be nothing for the former demon lord. Suddenly, Servain's flesh morphed unnaturally, and a grotesque form erupted from his body. He spat blood as it happened. Hyri's thoughts turned desperate. This situation was bad, dangerously so. Despite having the former demon lord on their side, everyone could be killed at this rate. She felt the urgency rising within her and resolved to find a way to at least save Kotaro. Servain began to chant and prepare his attack. He unleashed 3 powerful spells: Barakuroa Karmic Inferno Annihilation, Zaruvu Vacuum Cleaving Wave, and Baragaiza Electric Frost Blast. Hyri watched in shock. These were the strongest spells of the 3 major magical attributes, cast all at once. She had never seen anyone capable of something like this before. The overwhelming magical presence she had felt earlier, it wasn't a mistake. Everything the Demon Lord had said about 100 years ago was true after all. As Servain released the spells simultaneously, the massive hands they were on were partially obliterated. Despite the devastating impact, Arslad and Jura were in front of him completely unfazed. However, the grotesque form that had emerged from Servain's body was disintegrated in the attack. Jura found it extravagant that Servain had obliterated the creature with such force, but mocked the effort. With that level of magical power, he said, Servain wouldn't even be able to scratch him. Jura revealed himself to be a demon godkin, a being that transcended even the demon kin. Servain was stunned. He questioned the title. Jura had taken those high-level spells head-on and remained completely unharmed. Hyri's heart sank. It was as she feared. No one could stand against the current demon lord. No one but Kotaro. Hyri called out to Kotaro, and slowly, he opened his eyes and tried to move. Internally, he screamed at his body to move. He couldn't understand why it wouldn't respond. That girl had saved him countless times. It was finally his turn to return the favor. Hyri saw him struggle and smiled gently, urging him not to forget that feeling. Both Kotaro and Servain stared at her as she gathered the rest of her magical power and poured it all into a single spell, Pilgrim Flash. A brilliant flash of light engulfed the entire area. Hyri shouted for Demon Lord Servain to take Kotaro and escape. She declared that Kotaro would change the world. In that moment, Servain remembered Kotaro's earlier words, his hatred of domination. Without hesitation, he grabbed Kotaro and dashed off into the distance. One of the 10 demons, disappointed by the escape, pouted and said it was mean of them to run away after she had come all that way to play. This was number 6 of the 10 demons, Ramgris. She is my favorite among the group. I don't know anything about her, but from the very first moment I laid eyes on her, I loved everything about her. Another of the 10 demons jumped in excitedly, declaring it was now his turn. Confident in his speed, he announced he wouldn't lose. This was number 5, Igni. Jura then appeared beside him and proposed something intriguing. He suggested that it might be worth trying to draw the baby into the demon kin. Using Miria and Hyri, he proposed filling the current vacancies in the 10 demons with them. One of the 10 demons erupted in laughter, declaring it a brilliant idea. This was number 1, Slime.